Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss White Squall, starring Jeff, the Dude Man Bridges, Caroline Goodall, John Savage, Scott Wolf, Ryan Phillippe, and Balthazar Getty, directed by Ridley Scott. Now, before I get into this, I've never seen this movie before, but I did see the trailer for Gladiator 2, which came out a couple of days ago. And honestly, after Prometheus and Alien Covenant, and so many other misses from Ridley Scott's career, I'm kind of afraid to go to this one, but I'm not going to have any choice because I'm doing his filmography, so what the hell, why not? So let's get straight into this movie, and I'll talk more about Gladiator 2, as I'm afraid he's going to screw it up after all those other movies he's been missing for the last, 20 years or something. But let's get into this movie. We open in the year 1960, and we're in the town of Mystic, Connecticut, and Chuck Geig, played by Scott Wolf, is being sent to a school of shipping sales and go on the ship the Albatross. And he arrives and meets the other crewmates, and they're on the way to the Albatross, and the cinematography looks terrific in this movie, as the ocean looked very good as the crewmates arrive at the Albatross and meet Captain Christopher Sheldon, aka Skipper, as I'm going to call him, and is played by Jeff the Dude Man Bridges, as well as the other crewmates like the captain's wife, Dr. Alice Sheldon, played by Caroline Goodall. And I really like Jeff the Dude Man Bridges in this role, as well as his wife Alice, and they're the best performances in the movie in my opinion. We also get introduced to Frank Beaumont, played by Jeremy Sisto, Gil Martin, played by Ryan Phillippe, Robert March, played by David Lasher, excuse me. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. And Dean Preston and Shay Jennings and quite a few others as they jump in the water from the highest distance. And I was getting vibes from the score of Blade Runner, and Skipper suddenly appears and talks about what's in the water, but the acting by the others was rather flat, and the dialogue falls flat while they get the Albatross pulled together and cleaned up, and meets Frank's father, Francis, as he antagonizes Skipper by taking care of his son and leaves a cigarette on his ship. And the score to this movie is typical sea music, with an exception of maybe a couple of skits here and there from Blade Runner. They're working on cleaning the Albatross, and Shay almost chokes the life out of himself. And Skipper and Alice save his life, and Skipper asks Gil to climb the ropes while he's afraid to, and he's hesitant about it until he does and screams, looks into Skipper's eyes and urinates himself, which was kind of a dumb way to show fear. And at some point, he has to get over the phobia, which is something I got over in some heights, as well as some other childhood fears. And this feels like another Disney film that is a biopic, like this film, where it tells a good story, but is executed rather poorly, in my opinion. The Albatross sets sail as the crew pulls down the flags, while Chuck keeps an eye on the flags. And I like the scenes on the sea more than we hang out on land, as those scenes work so much better for me as the ship is going up and down because of the waves, and a flag falls out and a man named Preston goes overboard, and Skipper and Alice tries to save Preston, and the Dude Man and Caroline Goodall have good chemistry throughout the movie, while Chuck writes a note to his folks back home. And this movie is unfortunately not as inspiring enough for me. Gil has a nightmare of some kind, and Chuck wakes him up as he tells about his nightmare, and they arrive in town, and this is when the movie gets boring for me, as one of the crewmates almost switches a stripper, and he runs out like a coward of some kind. They come back and drink and are late at setting sail and get into fist fights with each other until they fall asleep and wake up the next day and see Skipper is there as he's eating some mashed potatoes, which was amusing, thinking they left them behind, although it almost looked like they did, as it felt amusing, but at the same time, it got boring after a while, as this movie half works and half doesn't work. We get back on sea, and a few of the crewmates fight because one wants to smoke a damn cigarette, and the other crewmates say, "No more smoking," and start a pact to make sure that they will never smoke ever again, which can be very hard for some. And some young ladies approaches the albatross and have some fun with the crewmates and flirt with one another, and that was cute at best. While Francis and Mrs. Beaumont take Frank out, while the other crewmates go to a party. Meanwhile, Francis acts jerkish to Frank and goes to the party all drunk, which were strange but boring scenes, in my opinion. While I'm liking the scenes on the sea better than on land, like I said before. They get back on sea and spot some dolphins as they're petting them until Frank shoots at one and pokes a hole on it as it bleeds out to death and is told by Skipper to finish off the dolphin, and he can't do it and forces Skipper to kill it off, which I felt so bad for the dolphin as Skipper gets Frank off the crew as they're led to believe he had cabin fever of some kind, as Skipper has a talk with the crewmate Frank as well as Skipper. And I didn't like this scene for the acting as well as killing of the dolphin. Skipper and Alice have an argument after talking with Frank, and Gil suddenly climbs up the ship to cause attention to say goodbye to Frank as he walks away, and they get needles on the booty. And another ship approaches as it's a battleship of some kind, and is the Puerto Ricans. And they get on the ship and asks Skipper some questions about why they're here, and almost takes one of who left their passport behind. But Skipper asks to take him, and that was pretty damn intense. The Albatross continues on their adventure, and I'm just going to say it now. This movie's a little too long, as they stop on an island and climb up a hill, which did look breathtaking, as they take off on the Albatross and have some more breathtaking journeys. A couple of crew members are awakened by Shay and do some work outside as it becomes a thunderstorm, which is another scene that was pretty intense, as it becomes a shipwreck to the point it scared the hell out of me. And luckily, some of the crew members survived this fatal shipwreck, but unfortunately others do not. As this sequence did go on a little bit too long, Chuck starts to hate the sea, and they're in the middle of the ocean with Skipper and other crewmates until another ship comes by and alerts them they're stranded as they get on the ship to St. Petersburg, Florida. And they welcomed back with some flashes, and next thing you know, it all comes to court because of the death of some of the crewmates while Chuck freaks out. And at this point, I could care less for the movie, as I'm kind of in the middle of the road with this movie at this point, as I like it, but I don't at the same time. The surviving crewmates blames Frank and his father, as they had something to do with the fatal accident happening, while Frank is visited by one of the crewmates to tell him about Frank's father being involved in that accident, as Francis sues Skipper for kicking Frank off the crew, as he killed a damn dolphin in the first place. And the court hearing begins, and Skipper explains his reasons for what he did to his crew and how he got minors onto the Albatross in the first place. And Skipper walks out of the room as a couple of the crew members, like Chuck and Frank, talk to Skipper while he almost walks out on his crew, and he inspires the boys, and the crew hugs their captain, and he leaves the courtroom as well as town, and the credits roll to a song by Sting playing and the climax was good but not great in my opinion, and the song didn't feel too inspiring in my mind, I'll say it best. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 5.0 out of 10. Don't get me wrong, the acting by Jeff the Dude Man Bridges and Caroline Goodall was pretty good, and the cinematography looks terrific, but the acting by the other actors as well as the dialogue just falls flat. While the score is also flat, and I was getting vibes from the score for Blade Runner, but done much worse. This tells a good story, but is executed rather poorly, and I do like the scenes on the sea with the Albatross more than on land, so that kind of worked for me, as they work so much better for me, and the chemistry by Jeff the Dude Man Bridges and Caroline Goodall, like I said, was good throughout. Unfortunately, the movie didn't inspire me like any other Disney film that's a biopic, as this is director Ridley Scott's middle-of-the-road film, as I like it, but at the same time I don't, because we're when we're on land, it gets boring after a while, and when we get on sea, it works for me. So, middle of the road recommendation for me, as it half worked and half didn't work. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with G.I. Jane, another movie I haven't seen before. And until then, he is Jeff the Dude Man Bridges as Captain Skipper.